ask questions about like, why do we resolve conflicts the way that we do, like nationally and internationally? And you can start pulling on that one. And that's going to get you to a thread that pushes you into spaces where now you're talking to people who are in the sustainability movement. And you can start with sustainability.
Today, I'm bringing you a wonderful conversation with Yana Ludwig. She is the co-author of Cooperative Culture, the Handbook. I think we have a great conversation about how to change the culture to make it from a competitive culture to a more cooperative. So I hope that you really like it. I apologize for maybe my camera. I think I need to buy a new camera and microphone, but her insights are fantastic. And I really, really recommend you guys to get this book because mine, Cooperation Paradigm, is more like the big vision, the why we need to go in that direction, right? Is the main strategy, is the vision, how to achieve abundance and free world. But Yana's book, the handbook, is more like almost like the how-to, the exercises, the little things that we need to do in our groups, even as an individual, to change that culture and to really have that mindset to go into cooperation. And I really enjoy having her, and I feel really lucky that we were able to connect. And hopefully we can collaborate more in the future. Also check out the Foundational for Intentional Communities. I will leave the links to both her website and the foundation, because this is the type of thing that we really need to transform society. For everyone listening, I just want to introduce Yana here. Welcome, everyone. And I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you, Yana, somebody that has like we were talking about, like resonates so much. We really see the world a little bit like similar. And she has dedicated her life to living and breathing cooperation through her work in intentional communities, something that she has been doing for 20 plus years. And it's just like a journey, right? That you have worked not just in communities, but also uh, work in economic justice, and you have done political advocacy and all kinds of things to push this sustainable vision for the world. So thank you so much. And we're going to discuss her book, The Cooperative Culture Handbook. And like I was saying, it's something that's very, very practical. So I think every person interested in pushing forward cooperation in society, every organization can benefit from this. And I'm just super excited. So Yana, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the things that we did in preparation for this, so your listeners have that backstory, is we read each other's books, and that was really interesting, I think. And my feeling is that I feel like you get us up to the point of like having a pretty solid articulation of like what the problems are, and then I feel like the handbook sort of picks up at that point and doesn't spend as much time laying that foundational work. So it was really interesting reading it and going like, oh, like, yeah, we could have talked more about the healthcare system the way that you're talking about it, and the education system the way that you're talking about it. And so it was interesting to sort of get that take and to see what your journey was to get to the point, which was pretty different than my journey and pretty different than Karen's journey. So Karen Gibnick was my co-author on the Cooperative Culture Handbook. So it was kind of fun to sort of watch how those strands all sort of got to a really similar place and a similar understanding of things. Yeah, and then as you say, the handbook is really intended. I mean, it's a handbook. It's intended to be kind of a how-to manual for how to like make that cultural shift. Um, yeah, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
yeah.
definitely, it's not like a novel, even though it can be read that way. I'm sure,
Mhm.
beginning to end, but it's really a lot of exercises. You have 26 keys there, and one of the things that I really love that I don't think I quite explained well, maybe wasn't even like really aware of this, is this thing about these three levels. Like you have the counterculture, right? So you have
Mhm.
the mainstream culture that you call or competitive culture, hyper individualistic and toxic in many ways.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then I talk about, okay, and the opposition of that, we have the cooperative paradigm. But there is something in between. Is this counterculture, right? As a reaction to that first initial string competition, and toxicity, people react in a way, but
Mhm, mhm.
that's not the like the best way, you know. So I would like you to maybe explain what that is and maybe give us an example so that
Yeah.
people understand better what that
Mhm.
counterculture is.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just walk through the sort of the basics of the three paradigms. And obviously, like, we've Karen and I have written a whole book about this, so there's a lot more that I could say. But just at a high level, the mainstream culture, the way that we talk about it is that it is competitive and individualistic. That's kind of the core. And there's this really deep belief that social and economic hierarchies are not just the way things are, but that they're actually right and that they're good. And that success is climbing that ladder and, being able to like get to a higher level on the hierarchies. And it's very much reinforced by capitalism, which demands that there's winners and losers and extracts value both from people and the planet. And that's where profit comes from in the capitalist system, is through that extractive way of interacting.
Mm,
There's a lot of emphasis on productivity and efficiency.
yeah.
And right now, it's still the dominant paradigm in the United States, anyway. And I mostly write about the United States because it's the thing I know the best. And so I think some of what we're talking about and how we're characterizing mainstream culture, I don't know if that's true in a lot of other places, but I definitely, I'm focused on North America as like where I sort of play and work. And in the US, there, starting in, particularly in the 1960s, there was this counterculture movement. And, that mainstream culture creates a lot of pain for people. And counterculture was really a response to that. And, when I think of the, why can't we all just get along? That kind of anguished outcry. If you translated that anguish into a cultural framework, that's really what counterculture is about. It's a very sincere response to it. And it's caring and compassionate. It's willing to see subjective experience as valid, which was a big shift. And it's also got a lot of martyrdom and a lot of codependence in it, and
Hmm.
lack of boundaries, conflict avoidance to the point of actually enabling some of the worst parts of that mainstream culture, because we just don't want to rock the boat too much. And there's a knee-jerk mistrust of leadership. Like, it's not just mistrusting hierarchies and saying hierarchies are just completely bad, but it's also really distrustful of leadership in general. And it values diversity, but it tends to be assimilationist with how it does it. And that's that don't rock the boat thing. So, like, we want people to come in who are different, but you've got to sort of get with our program to be part of it. And so there's that assimilation thing. And it's really pretty ineffective from a governance standpoint. So that's that counterculture stuff. And that's where a lot of people's buttons get pushed, where I start talking about it, because a lot of people have invested a lot of years of their lives getting out of that mainstream culture and getting into the counterculture. And then I come along and go like, actually, this is kind of toxic too. So cooperative culture, which is kind of the North Star that Karen and I are trying to set with the handbook, is, it's still very much about caring about others and sharing, but it's done in a way that's got really healthy boundaries to it. So there's clear agreements. It's okay to say no to things. And, discernment is probably the key word for this particular paradigm. So getting clear about like what is and isn't factual, what is and isn't systematic, what is and isn't aligned with whatever our collective purposes are and our collective well-being. And when you're engaging that discernment, it tends to lead to pretty effective, but also pretty compassionate leadership. And, hierarchies used really deliberately, and only when it kind of balances out being effective with making sure that people are being heard. So we're very careful about how we use hierarchy, but we don't think it's necessarily totally evil, and we don't think it's necessarily good. It's just a tool in this kind of framework. And I think the core is really interdependence. We genuinely value differences and see them as a strength and a kind of catalyst for evolution, whether that's like personal evolution or organizational or systems level evolution. Like, that combination of interdependence and valuing diversity is pretty important. So, in a very brief nutshell, that's kind of what the three paradigms are.
Wonderful.
Um,
And you mentioned that you're more focused on North America, and my journey is different, like you said.
Mhm,
I think
mhm,
that's one of the things that allowed me to see
mm,
what I saw, because in Europe things are a little bit different. So
mhm,
be more socialistic oriented, you know.
mhm, mhm,
And I felt it here, I felt this super strong individualism, which I see now, obviously, through the media and the power that capitalism has. Well,
mm,
it's just really spreading even stronger everywhere now. So
mm,
I think
mhm.
more it's like this everywhere. But it's still, I can see that United States has the strongest hold on this way of doing things.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, for
and
sure.
and that
Yeah.
was interesting to me to experience. And
Mhm.
and definitely the hierarchy thing. If you have a thought, let me hear your thought, and then we can talk about hierarchies.
Well, no, I just wanna affirm what you're saying, like, I think that immigrants have a really unique positioning in relation to this whole conversation, because you've seen something, and even if it's a little bit different from the US, like it gives you sort of a window and a lens to kind of be able to see some of these things a little more clearly. And so I have really valued the things that I've learned from, from my friends in organizing work who are immigrants and or have had really deep experience with other cultures. Like I think it's really valuable. So I just want to affirm that. And I do think that, you can very roughly map like the United States political scene onto this, where like I feel like the Republicans are, mostly that kind of cutthroat business, mainstream culture kind of vibe. And the more centrist Democrats are like, they're not necessarily critical of capitalism because that's a little too um it's a little too confrontational, I think, for a lot of centrist Democrats. And so we're sort of looking for softer versions of capitalism. And then, I think like the progressive Democrats and leftist groups like socialists, like the Green Party, and like, the worker owned co op movement and the new economy movement. I mean, I think all of that stuff is really leaning much more into this kind of cooperative culture framework. Um, and the main world that I hang out in, the residential intentional community world, it's like very much counterculture. I mean, that is there,
Mhm.
it's still really stuck there. And um, can you hear that? There's
Yeah,
a phone ringing in the background. So,
not a big deal. I can hear
not a big
something.
deal. Okay.
Hear you.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that I've been on a break from intentional communities for the last 4 years, in part because I've been trying to figure out like how do I relate to this world that where it's really embedded in that kind of counterculture thinking in a lot of ways. And so yeah, so I think there's different pockets, where these different paradigms are kind of ascendant and more of uh, the way that most of the people in those spaces are thinking about things.
Wonderful. And I would like to bring back politics maybe later. It could be a little
Yeah.
fun to do that. Um, and speaking of the counterculture and hierarchies, this is another question that I have, but I want to flow with the conversation here. So I had this thought many times as like, gosh, I see like hierarchies are like so efficient,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
really.
Yeah.
Uh, Anytime you go and contact people that are in this type of like movement, that's a big no, just a no go zone,
Okay.
And I thought like, well, that's a shame, we can really take this with a cooperative mindset.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
obviously, when it's a hierarchy, when we're imposing things, we don't want that. But we are subjected many times to like you go to the doctor and you allow this person has an authority, has a knowledge, and you trust. So it's always based on.
mhm, mhm,
And as long as we follow the hierarchy, the pyramid in through trust, I have no problem with that. And I think there is so much
mhm.
efficiency there. And
Yeah.
I love that you bring this, and I want you to talk about it like this hierarchy little or
Mhm.
light, you call
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think it's wonderful because why not? So tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I talk about it in terms of hierarchy light. And the to me, the healthy way to be using hierarchy is that it's got to be purpose driven. And often it's short term. It's not like somebody is in a position and then they're in that position for life or for many, many years at a
Mm.
time. And, it's not about status, it's not about creating permanent structures. And so, because of that, it rarely solidifies into really intense power dynamics.
Mhm.
So somebody moves into a role to do a particular thing, to, coordinate or manage a discrete project, where you really want the best person in there to do that coordination. And that best is defined, sometimes it's by what they know. It's like you've got an engineer in the mix, and it's a project that needs a strong engineer. Sometimes it's about how good they are with the other people that are involved. Sometimes it's because they share a language or an identity with the people. And so they're really trusted. And there's going to be a way that they're going to be able to shorthand. And so that trust thing is very much there. And so you could think of it, you could even call it trust-based hierarchy, could
Mm.
be another thing that I think would
I
be a
like that. Yeah.
label for it. Um, yeah, and an example of it actually that is very short term is like if you choose your facilitators carefully, like the facilitator is in a power position for that hour or 3 hours or whatever it is. And so they're being trusted with some power in a very particular role that's going to have an endpoint to it. And the same thing, and sometimes it's a 2 year long project. So it can be short or long, but the point is that we're trying to not harden permanent power structures in place. And we're being very, very deliberative about how we approach management and coordination and hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic process, and it's based on strengths and it's based on trust.
Yes.
And I think that is the way we should do it. Wonderful. Yeah. So going back to the politics, because I think it's so interesting, and why not? That's a controversial topic. So
Mhm.
to me, always I see it like the Republicans, in this case in the U.S., or Democrats, right, left, they always think they have the solution, and the other group of people are wrong, and etc. And I was trying to have this conversation with people where I tell them like, perhaps it's not so much the ideology itself, because the ideology we can always has like good points almost on both sides of the equation. Perhaps it's the strategy, the way we are doing this. And I bring back cooperation and competition, because to me you can have a free market, and I know capitalism is a specific type of free market where really the goal is to accrue capital and accrue like resources and control. And to me, that's the only problem that I have, with capitalism. That really the narrative is that. So obviously, just from the beginning, it's going in the wrong direction. But I'd like to talk more about the free market. An example of free market where all the players, all the resources are there, and we can do whatever we want. And then I think if we instill in people this cooperative mindset where you're just trying to make a decent living, you're not trying to extract as much as you can possibly. Uh, with a sustainability mindset too, well, you can go into the forest and like maybe cut down a few trees. You don't have to cut down the whole forest
Mhm.
for the short term benefit of your company and increase your stocks and da 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 da.
Mhm. Mhm.
Coalition thing is like a willingness to be part of that mindset that sees the benefit of the group. So you could have a system where it's like a free market that is successful in the long term. And also on the other side, you can have like a system that is a communist system, right? Like the Republicans are gonna like hardly criticize communist countries and da 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 da
Mhm.
da. Have all these numbers and statistics, and many times it's just the group. The group is just not respecting the rights of the individual either, but
Uh-huh.
it
Uh-huh.
has like again, a competitive mindset where you are not as important as me. To me, at the end of the day, that's the key part here.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if we can defend and uh, say that both the individuals and the group are important, and we have this cooperative mindset, almost any type of ideology could be successful, is what I'm trying to see, to say. I don't
Mhm.
know if that makes sense. So we're
Yeah.
emphasizing so much the ideology, but we are like leaving to the side the deeper narrative that that uh, leads the interactions every day.
Mhm, mhm.
I don't know if
Yeah,
makes.
and I mean, I think I hold this one a little. I mean, I think the main difference between how I see your book and my book talking about it, and how I think we're going to be talking about it in this session, is that I think that um, the culture. I don't think you can separate the culture, the economic system, and the ideology. I think they are reinforcing factors
Mhm.
with each other, and so I do think that there are ideologies that are just fundamentally oppressive, and so, and I think what people actually object to more than anything else is statism. It's where, it's like it's not so much that like communism is bad, but it's like, most of the examples that we have that are large scale were like really about state control and power over that economic system. And it's not that different from capitalism. It's just the difference between like, is it like an oligarchy where like the wealthy people are the ones who have the power, or is it some sort of like state power that is really in the hands of a few people? And so for me, it's like the interesting thing about power is where do you get your power and on whose behalf are you using it? And I think that, socialism and communism are fundamentally, when you don't get that statism overlay on top of them, are fundamentally about what are society's genuine needs. And capitalism is really about accruing capital, in the hands of a handful of people. And so I do think that there's a fundamentally different ethical basis to those economic systems, and they're absolutely related to the culture. I mean, that hyper individualistic culture wants a hyper individualistic economic system, and that hyper individualistic economic system feeds that hyper individualistic culture. And you can't really, I don't think you can really separate the two things out completely. I think we can, there's certainly, the regulating capitalism is kind of where, people like Elizabeth Warren, who, and I have a lot of respect for Elizabeth Warren, but, people who are talking about like, what we really need to do is just regulate the capitalists. And I'm like, you can do that, but it's kind of like caging a tiger, like the tiger is still there and the tiger is still, a meat eater ultimately. And I think that's, the big difference between Warren and Bernie Sanders is like, I think Bernie gets it that like, capitalism is fundamentally flawed if what you care about is the well-being of most people. And, other than that, the two of them are, they're buddies and they're pretty close together in a lot of, I think the ethics that drive them are really similar. But I think that Bernie's made that jump to understanding that, yeah, the economic paradigms are actually like, there's some fundamentals to those economic ideologies, that,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, I think you articulated this really well. And I think like the economic paradigms, what I'm trying to say is like there's a deeper paradigm narrative that is driving that. Otherwise,
Mhm,
where
mhm,
does capitalism come from?
mhm,
And
mhm,
even in the state, in the more like a statism, you said,
mhm,
why we don't get that? Because you said, well, if we don't get these, well, it's because most of the times we get it.
mhm, mhm.
Why is that? It's because
Yeah.
we have this deeper narrative that um, they can abuse people too, even
Mhm,
under the umbrella of communism.
mhm,
Yes.
mhm,
On paper, uh, communism and socialism is more what we want for society. It's just that the word itself says it, like communism, community,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Versus
mhm.
capitalism, capital, like
Right,
me,
right.
it's just right there, like in your face. But
Mhm,
why many times, or most of the times, or always, have not been successful? It's what I'm trying to get to people. Is like it's because the deeper narrative that it's it's
mhm,
always like the separation where like it's me versus you. Even in the state of even in communism, where I'm gonna like r- I'm gonna like go over you and like do whatever I have to do to accomplish this thing.
mhm, mhm,
Aesthetism, I think you call it. And
mhm. Yeah.
it's corruption. It's corruption at the end of the day. To me, corruption is an extreme form of individualism, of me getting what I want at your expense and not
Mhm,
seeing
mhm.
you as this other person.
Yeah.
And when you have that vision, sometimes I tell people like, and it's an extreme case, it's very hard to really obviously it's an exercise in imagination. But if tomorrow, like we put like all the federal employees and all the government people, the power and everything, if we put somebody like Mother Teresa or another person with high consciousness, probably even if we have a system that by itself is meant to be corrected and have systemic violence and all these things will go a lot of a lot smoother,
Mm.
because mm, even if the laws are there to make it run in the way of capitalism, there are always like there's like so much gray areas too. So like a person signing a contract can sign like a contract that is not as extractive,
Mhm,
except so to me, like that's what like I'm trying to do with the book, and I think you too, obviously, is to change the deeper narrative.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
we stay at the level of politics, there's even like a deeper level. There is like a deep narrative. And I think all the exercises that you guys have in the book, like the 26 exercises, that's just breaking away that. It's just chipping up,
yeah,
breaking the patterns because it's just so many patterns. We grew up with here in the US, this hyper individualism, and even socialistic people, they don't think so, but they live in that as well.
mhm, mhm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, and I think a lot of this is, I mean, the kind of evolution that I think both you and I are trying to fan the fires of with this. I mean, it's long-term stuff,
right.
I tell people sometimes that like like I've lived in community for 26, 27 years, something like that. A long time. And, have really made a study of this stuff and literally wrote one of the books about this stuff. And I still mess it up. I mean, I still find myself defaulting into competitive moments when I feel scared or vulnerable, like I can still go there. And so I think even if you have a really deep understanding of this stuff, it takes some serious time. And I think that you said you were saying like sort of chipping away at stuff, and that, we have these 26 different pieces that we break down in the book. And it is really just like taking a bite here, and trying to, I think part of why we organize the book this way is that we're trying to make it so that just about anybody can find an in where it's like, okay, that one makes sense to me as a starting place. And I can like really look for that pattern. And then, like you coming into the US as an immigrant, like you probably were able to recognize a lot of those patterns because they weren't your default. And so, we're trying to just give people kind of an in with this stuff, because for some people it's going to be organizing for economic justice, and they're going to start tugging on that thread, and that's going to probably push them into more of like socialist spaces and green party spaces and mutual aid organizing spaces and that kind of stuff. And so you can start with the economic part and kind of chip away at that piece, and then that is probably going to lead you to conclusions that are in line with some of the other pieces in here. And the same thing with like you can start with like activism, and ask questions about like, why do we resolve conflicts the way that we do, like nationally and internationally? And you can start pulling on that one. And that's going to get you to a thread that pushes you into spaces where now you're talking to people who are in the sustainability movement. And you can start with sustainability and why do we treat the earth like garbage? And then tug on that thread. And that's, eventually, I think if you tug enough on any one of those strands, you're going to find yourself bumping into the other ones, because it really is, um, there's a coherent package here of cultural stuff. And, that I think that it's that coherence right now with the mainstream competitive stuff, like that system up until pretty recently, it's kind of hung together and it's kind of still worked. And that's starting to crumble. I mean, I think that's really what we're seeing right now, is that it's getting to the point where it's really having to be forced on people in order to be sustained and in order to stay as dominant as it is right now. We're having to like get very, very heavy handed in order to sustain those things. And that's a sign that a paradigm is breaking, and it's starting to fall apart when you have to be as forceful as I think
Right.
things are being right now,
Right. Right.
you know?
Yeah. Or we have something else. We have to see the system crumbling,
Mhm.
before the creation of something new, we have to see, go through hard times.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and that's too bad. Some of us have been trying to get it to be a gentler transition for a long time, and it hasn't moved fast enough. So here we are. We're in collapse.
I was just
Oh,
thinking, you want to hear one of the first things that like stood out to me when I came to the US is
yeah.
I turned on the TV. I just couldn't believe how many drug commercials there were on TV. I was like, what? Drug commercials? Like, I thought that's for the doctor to decide, because
Mhm.
you just go to the doctor and it tells you take this or take that. But no, here's like, tell your doctor about this or that. And by the way, these are the side effects. And it was like one after the other. I just couldn't believe it. Like, and all the side effects, I was like, wow, that's a lot of side effects. Like, who wants to buy that? It was so
Yikes.
weird. So,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, well, it used to be that, like, I can remember when those commercials didn't have to um, do the side effects thing.
mhm.
So it used to be you just get the like smiling, happy looking people and like, this was great. And then you didn't have that. And it was definitely, you could really see the effects of regulation kick in at some point because then the last 10 seconds is always the blah, 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 where they're,
Right.
trying to go through it really fast and
So
like
many.
nobody's
It's like,
really
what?
catching. Every once in a while you catch the word death and you go, ooh, that's a
I'm not sure if it's worth it. Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
out of, yeah, I was just gonna ask you, like, out of those 26 exercises, and more than an exercise, it's just like a whole like dynamic to deepen your understanding of your current culture, how to transition to a more cooperative culture, etc. Like, is there one or two that like are your, if I have to tell people like, hey, do you have only this day to do this? What are two powerful exercises that you can recommend people uh,
Yeah.
work on?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I have one that I would recommend as like everybody's starting place because part of the point is that we want people to be able to like pick it up, have one of the key titles catch their attention and go, okay, I'm going to start there. But I think my personal favorites in terms of the exercises. So the one that I use, the personal exercise that I use the most is one in there that's called Mine, Not Mine, where you basically, when you're in a conflict or you're struggling with something, um, I think one of the things that makes it really overwhelming sometimes to do personal work on things is that your mind is always like you try to start taking responsibility for something and then your mind goes, but them, but no. And so having a map, and so basically the exercise is that you take a piece of paper, you draw a line down the middle of it, and at the top of one side you write mine, and at the top of the other side you write not mine. And then you just go and you start mapping out and sort of unpacking whatever the conflict is into like, okay, here's things that I can take responsibility for. Like, I took too long to communicate with my partner about X, Y, and Z, and then they felt blindsided. That's on me, and then there's like, my partner's reactivity that is really about like their childhood shit, like that's not actually mine. Like, I can't be responsible for that. And so it's a way of sort of parsing out what you are and aren't actually responsible for and what you are and aren't in control of and able to own and able to talk about and able to get a little bit vulnerable about like those parts that are what's my childhood crap that's feeding into all this. And so I use that exercise a lot. It is my go-to when I'm struggling with somebody else over something or when I'm struggling with what's happening in the wider world. It's really helpful to me to just sit down and then I can release a feeling of responsibility for those things that I'm not actually responsible for.
Mhm.
Um, so that's my like personal processing one that I think is just really, really helpful. The group exercise, I love the spectrums exercises and this is basically the the live version of it is that you basically create an imaginary line across the floor and you designate one side of the room as one end of the spectrum and the other side of the room the other end of the spectrum. And it can really be anything. It can be positions about something that the community or the group or your town is wanting to do. So it can be like used for like political stances on things. It can also be used for like introvert, extroverts behaviors, or,
Right.
like anything.
And you
And then have
yourself more in the middle or more towards one side or the
yeah,
other.
you have to have everybody stand up and literally position themselves
Mhm.
along the spectrum. And as a facilitator, I love these exercises so much. I mean, they're a super fast way to gather a ton of data about where people are at. It's also a way for people to be able to recognize alliances where they can see, oh, this person who like maybe I haven't talked to in my town before and I don't know anything about them. And now I'm finding myself standing next to them about this really important thing. And like we have something in common. But it works really well for people who are visual learners because they can see what's
Mhm.
happening. For people who are auditory learners because they're hearing what other people are saying. Because ideally the facilitator is saying like, okay, let's hear from somebody in these different places. And it works for kinesthetic learners who
Yeah.
rarely get their needs
Yeah.
met
Mhm.
in meeting things. And I'm very kinesthetic. Like I mean, people won't be able to see this, but you're noticing probably that I talk with my hands a lot. Like I'm very, very much about that body stuff. And, I think as long as you're being mindful about different disability needs, like spectrums are fun, they're
Sure.
connecting, they're often really enlightening. And I also love them because they're one of the most frequent places where people will resist your instructions as a facilitator and where they'll be like, I don't like that binary that you picked to do that. And that is actually some of the most interesting data that happens. Is like, here's somebody who's like, I don't think these are opposites, or like, I'm having a really hard time with this. And if you create a safe enough space that people have that permission to push back, we're actually practicing for moments like the political moment that we're in right now, where it's like people have to be able to like create resistance to things. Like you have to be able to stand up to the authority figure of the moment. And like you're there as the facilitator and you're kind of the authority figure at the moment, and somebody's pushing back. And I actually love that because so this exercise does so many different things, including giving people an opportunity to practice really owning their voice and really owning where they're at with something on a whole bunch of different levels. And I adore spectrum exercises. And so if there's anything that I would be like, if there's any facilitators out there listening, I'm like, start using spectrums more. And you can do them online too. You can create slides,
Mhm.
you can move dots around. So there's a way to adapt it for this sort of online world that I think we're more and more in. But man, I absolutely adore those exercises on lots of different levels.
Yeah, and like you said, just the movement itself is so like important, and you can see the person, it's visual, it's auditory. I'm gonna try to use this with a group of students that I'm gonna be actually makes very excited in a couple of weeks. For the second time, I will be doing this cooperation workshop at UNC, University North Carolina, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna bring one of these to them.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And you brought up technology. I just wanted to also discuss this.
Yeah.
Mm, what is your take on technology with all this potential of using artificial intelligence and every other thing that we have out there right now? How can we use it? And is that good? Is that bad? What are your take on this?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's both good and bad. And I mean, I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record here, but I mean, I think as long as capitalism is the economic paradigm we're in, I think it's going to lean toward more damaging than it is more good, because it's going to get used. And I think AI is an interesting example of that, where I think this is something that could have been a really positive thing, and yet basically what it's doing is it's gutting artists and making it so that people like me who like write for a living, it's like, well, now my stuff is fodder for that. And I've actually plugged in some questions into AI where it's like I've done a lot of writing on this, and I'm like, wow, that is so much not the answer that I think I want to be getting out there. But it's just pulling from all different kinds of sources, and some of those are really bad sources.
Mhm.
And there's no discernment. I mean, when we're talking about discernment being a critical thing with cooperative culture, it's like I think I think the lack of discernment that we now have online about where we're getting our information from, and that's not just an AI thing, it's also, the algorithms and, all the stuff that's happening on social media. So, I mean, I think right now what we're seeing is, technology being used to basically play a widespread disinformation game. And I think that's really disheartening. I think there's other kinds of technology. I think manufacturing technology, I think it has the potential to lead to a place where we're working less hours, we're being able to work more flexibly, we're being able to have higher wages with the same amount of productivity. And so I think that potential is there. And right now, that's not how it's getting used. That's not the outcome that's happening. It's like we're just having fewer jobs and corporations are making more money. And so I really think that capitalism has poisoned a lot of the potential for technology to be a good thing. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
right now I lean on the it's more harmful end of the spectrum, but I don't actually think it's the technology's fault. you know?
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
100% agree with you. And I typically say that technology is neutral, and I get pushback. And I'll give an example. No,
Mhm.
technology is not neutral because the remote control, right, is preventing you from walking to the TV and exercising. So yeah, I get that. Obviously, technology is much of the things that we have around us are built around capitalism, and that's not healthy. But
Mhm.
what I mean, technology is neutral, is like we give it the use that we want to give it. And right now, like you said, capitalism keeps driving the use of this technology in an extractive way,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
instead of like help people to earn more and work less, for example, well, we just keep seeing the same thing: accumulation at the top, and these guys are just using AI to replace people and
Mhm.
accumulate more. And it could be used in a totally different way. And it's unfortunate. That's why it's important, you and I and other people, that we're working in changing the narrative, changing the underlying narrative. And we need to get to these. And I think I read on the book as well something that I really like. You know that the Wall Street movement, the 99 and versus the
Mhm.
1%,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we have to kill these people or destroy them, whatever, they're the enemy. And to me, so it was like, no, we have to actually like convince these people, if it's possible, we're gonna try, that there is something even better, that it
Mhm.
could be more prosperity for everyone, because this system is not sustainable. At some point, people are gonna be fed up, and we're gonna have another French Revolution. So how is
Mhm.
that gonna go well for them? No. But right now, the culture is still like, for them, that we're like so great, we're so virtuous, we are at the top, at the pinnacle, and yeah, we're rightfully using this technology to improve it, for the benefit of everyone. So these people live in a self hypnotizing like world, and they truly believe they're the heroes of the story. So
Mhm.
we got to
Mhm.
maybe teach them and show them that no, there is a better way, and everybody can be better off. So that's how I see technology. Like Alan Watts, for example, comes to mind, saying things like, a long time ago, decades ago, this guy was like ahead of his time for sure, saying that, hey, we should pay ourselves from the work that machines do. And yeah, like, yeah, why not?
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely, we should.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a growing batch of businesses that are organized as worker-owned cooperatives, and I think that's really where a lot of hope lies for me, is seeing that worker co-ops are becoming so much more of a thing because, in that case, it's like there's no shareholders that are getting their profit, and the workers are the managers, and it's the same people, and the people who owned the company are the ones who are doing the work. And in that case you can make that decision to, like, pass the profits on to the people who are doing the work. And I think that that's, I mean, which is really, I mean, socialism really is worker ownership. I mean, that's what it means.
Right.
And so I think, like, I look at the Mondragon collective in Spain, is one of the biggest networks of worker ownership in the world that's, done some really good things. And it's not perfect. I mean, there's definitely some flaws in that system, but it's done a really good job of like demonstrating what is possible with a network of worker-owned cooperatives cooperating together. And so I think we could be making that choice. And there are places where that choice is being made. Um, but it's not at Microsoft, and it's not at X, and it's not, you
Yeah.
know, at, these healthcare companies, the health insurance companies, which health
Ah,
insurance isn't even a thing. Like there's no product
do
there.
not
It's just
even get me started
like
on that.
gatekeeping, and it's like, well, they're definitely not going to be like passing the profits on, because that's not the orientation. So I do think, I mean, this is why we're having this conversation, is, it's about this underlying paradigm and culture that drives all of this decision making.
Yeah, and cooperation, people need to understand that it's just it's a win-win. It's a good thing in the long term. Like it's a lack
Hmm.
of awareness, a lack of vision, and it's so short-minded,
Hmm. Hmm.
that it's just they miss it. It's like the Native Americans talking about several generations. How is that going to affect like us in 7 generations?
Right.
We don't
Right.
even have to go that far, but we can go like a few years, a few decades, like long-term cooperation, and we see this in nature. It just brings so much more abundance, and it's more like also more, you talk about resilience a lot, and I love that. It's more resilient. A system that is more cooperative is more resilient.
Right.
It's like a
Right.
chain with every part of the chain is strong, because you can have people or elements come to help that part that is maybe a little weak in the moment, and that makes the system very reliable, very strong. So
Hmm.
that we've had so many conflicts. All the conflicts that we have is based on this competitive vision, this capitalism that me at your expense. So
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
um just wanted to maybe start to wrap it up. The
Hmm.
wonderful conversation that I could talk for hours with you at least. You believe me, I'm loving it, and it's just so wonderful. And if you could just give one piece of advice to groups, obviously you have so much experience with groups, and it's such a delicate like place, because, like you said before, we're dealing with humans, and humans are like messy, so we have our own childhood, our own trauma. So, wow.
Hmm.
And if you could just give them one piece of advice to start like building a cooperative culture, where could we start for that group?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the starting place with all of this is just awareness, and starting to get good at recognizing the patterns. And I think that these cultural tensions are really running a lot of our good intentions into the ground. I think so many, I started down the track of learning consensus, learning to be a facilitator and stuff, because I just saw groups failing all over the place. And it was like, we're losing so much potential because
Hmm.
we don't know how to get along, and we don't know how to cooperate. And so I think that first step is seeing the patterns, and then, just tucking in and diligently learning together, and recognizing that this is going to be, a long-term journey. And, you know, I mean, the whole reason why this book exists is to create those opportunities for those aha moments and the pattern recognition to start, and then for practice. And, I think for people that aren't currently part of a group, I mean, I think finding a group to practice with, and recognizing that this is, it is like learning how to be a great basketball player. It's like, it's going to take practice, and it's going to take building muscles, and getting really good um, at like all the different skills that are involved with it. So
The recognition of patterns is huge.
it's huge.
So much like these uh, underneath that we're not even aware of, and then you start interacting with people.
Hmm.
Wow, wow! Look at me thinking this way or acting the other. So to me,
Yeah.
cooperation, yeah, it's probably one of the most powerful personal development tools, because there is so many books, and you started talking in the beginning about productivity. You go to the personal development section, and I think it's changing a little bit lately, but it's all about like you have to be more productive. The
Right.
narrative underlying is like, what is this about? Like, I don't need to be more productive. That's the opposite of what I want.
Right, right. Well, and so many of the
You know?
solutions that are out there are it's about you as an individual, and it's like stripped out of all of this
Right.
context to what's
Exactly.
going on. Like even like, like I'm a huge fan of therapy. Like I've been in therapy multiple times in my life, but it is very much about how do I get
The
better?
individual.
And most of my therapists have been like out of their element as soon as I start talking about group dynamics, or like the last time I was in therapy, I went into it and one of my presenting problems was climate anxiety, where I'm like, I'm really stressed out about what's happening with the climate, and they just had no idea what to do with that. And it's like, well, this is stuff that like we are all in this together.
Mhm.
And so we've got to, I mean, yes, that individual work is important, but there's also they're like, then you got to find your people who are going to like really support you doing that work and who are going to be helping come up with like what are our solutions together, because I don't think we're going to fix hyper individualism by becoming better individuals. I think it's going to
Right.
learn how to be better community. I think that's really where that solution lies. So I think taking that orientation forward, I think is probably, the best advice that I can give is, find the people that are going to support us being in this together.
Yeah. And going back to a key word here, interdependence.
Yeah.
That's the truth of the matter, that we are interdependent.
Yes.
So we cannot do it by ourselves. We can't just by improving ourselves. It has to be done in community with others. And that is the greatest opportunity that we have. So I agree 100%. And if you allow me, I'm going to finish by reading just one little paragraph from the vision that you guys have,
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
which I love. I totally align with this. And so here we go. We envision a world where cooperation and collaboration are the norm, not the exception. In this world, we balance compassion and understanding with discernment and effective action, guided by the motivation of collective well being. In this world, our individual needs, interests, and skills are honored and valued and put into service for collective and planetary health. Phew, yes, that's it. That's absolutely beautiful. And that's what we need. That's the vision that we need. So I highly recommend anybody listening to this talk here that you guys get this book, the Cooperative Culture Handbook. It's full of it's full of wisdom and really like know how to make this work happen in real terms. I really love it. I really want to make it like a workbook for workbook. Sometimes the English like fails me.
You're correct.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
Adjective goes first. I don't know.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
to really like learn to do this with people, and it should be one in like every community, every like institution almost. I can tell that you have so much experience. You have probably had to deal with so many problems and humans to to come up with all these little nuances and even the prompts that you have for dialogues are so insightful. I think language is another part that maybe we didn't
Mm,
talk about today, but language is transformative. We have to use a different language, and that's another like frontier that we'll need to tackle at some point. So, Yana, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for the work that you do. It's really important. I hope that there are like 100 Yanas in the world, but at least we have you, so we know you are doing good work out there. And just wanted to
right.
thank you for having this time with me today.
Well, you're welcome, and we also have you. You're working on this stuff too and getting the word out about it. So thank you for your work. I appreciate it.